Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it another minute as everyone is joining, and then we will begin. All right, I will go ahead and begin. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Katie Tran. I'm the Director of Events and Communications for the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to today's webinar on managing to communicate. Thanks for being here. I'd like to just jump right in and introduce Dr. Maureen Ori. She is a longtime strategic partner of the San Diego Chamber and has been offering pro bono workshops for chamber members for almost a decade. Maureen's latest book, A Year of Resilience, was just released early this year and was much more timely than she ever anticipated. She has spoken at numerous international conferences over the years on building resilience and helping people stay afloat in challenging times. She is the founder and CEO of the Workplace Learning and Performance Group, which is celebrating 11 years in business. Maureen holds a doctorate in organizational leadership and has worked extensively developing over 15,000 leaders for corporate clients and volunteer organizations around the world. That's a lot of accolades. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Maureen Ori. Please take it away.
Thanks so much, Katie. I appreciate that. And welcome. Good morning to everyone. If you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself in chat. That's something we'll be using throughout the program this morning. And we have a lot of ground to cover, so I would like to go ahead and jump right in. Our topic, as you know, that's who I am, right? Our topic is on managing to communicate. Let me give you a couple of tech tips to help you fully participate in this program. We will be using chat, and sometimes what I've heard from people is they still are learning Zoom a bit, and how can you adjust your screen most effectively. If you haven't used chat before, you can look at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little icon that says chat. And I see that a couple people have already found it. Please take a minute to introduce yourself, where you're calling in from, maybe even what drew you to this particular topic this morning. And then if you realize, I don't know, a lot of people don't realize this, you can adjust your screen. If you go to the top of your screen where it says View Options, you will be able to choose a drop-down menu, which gives you the side-by-side mode. So you can see the people and you can see the content. And the cool thing about that is then you can actually adjust your screen so that you can move things around a bit. If you see right in the middle, there's two little gray lines that you can adjust one way or the other. Gives you that gallery view and your content view, if that's something you like to see. Otherwise, let's jump right in and take a look at our overall program objectives. If you notice with the Chamber Marketing, there are 3 sessions that we'll be doing over the next few months. The first one is today, called Managing to Communicate, where we'll really look at some of the intricacies of leadership communication. What are some thought processes or maybe mindset views when we look at how we communicate as managers and leaders? The next session next month will be on constructive conversations. How do we have constructive conversations, even virtually, that build people up as opposed to break people down and still resolve challenges or conflicts in the workplace? And the last session will be called Write Right, which is really about written business communication. What are some strategies that can help you improve your written communication? Today, we're going to look at specifically 3 main concepts, and there's going to be loads of content, so get your notebook and be ready to jump right in. We'll look at the role of leadership credibility in communication, as well as what is your preference? How does courage impact your communication as a leader? And then how does your thinking really approach or impact your role as a leader? And so we'll look at spectrum thinking as a tool for strategic communication. That's what we're jumping into this morning. And so let's get moving. When we look at the credibility cornerstones, and I want you to put it into chat, if you would, please. Put it into chat. What is your thought? What is your perspective about credibility and leadership? We have a lot of examples in the world today, both good and bad, and I'm not making any particular statement except the fact that, well, and over the course of the history of the world, there's been great examples of good and bad leadership, who's credible and who's not. And so when you put it into chat, what does credibility mean to you as a leader? And as you put that into chat, I want you to think about, first of all, and my approach when I do these workshops is to look at what are the tools, what are some tools that you can utilize that might help you increase and understand this content. So when we look at leveraging credibility in the workplace, here's a quick, get my slide to advance. I'm going to take a look at your chat. And what does credibility mean to you in the context of, thank you, Lisa. I see honesty, credentials, follow-up, making sure that perhaps you do what you say what you do. And when you think about credibility as a leader, it truly is crucial for obtaining the buy-in needed for success, right? How do we get buy-in? How do we get people to follow us and trust us is really through credibility. So I see trust, I see integrity, I see consistency, competencies, effective communication. All those are great, fantastic ideas when it comes to really building your credibility. But have you thought about purposefully building your credibility? So when we look at the word credibility really means it's the root, right? The root is cred, which really means to believe. If we look at how do we help people believe in us as a leader, we need to be purposeful in building our credibility. Thanks, Brittany. I love that comment about humility and honesty, really being able to be humble about the work that we're doing and yet be credible. What's interesting is when we look at belief, if credibility really means to people believe in you, building that trust and expertise as a leader leads to belief. And a lot of that has to do with our approach to communication. Here's a tool that I'd like to introduce to you. It's called the Credibility Cornerstones. And we look at the 2 aspects of credibility. We have expertise and we have trust. And there's a lot of folks, and I've worked with a lot of aerospace companies, and there's a big debate in high-tech firms, right? Do you need this high expertise to be able to be a leader within that industry, or is it really about trust? Or is it a little bit of both? Can you have high expertise and high trust? What are your thoughts when you look at the cornerstones of credibility in this particular tool? You can have low expertise and low trust. How is that going to work for you as a leader? You can have high expertise, but low trust. Okay, how does that influence you as a leader as well? Or you can have perhaps low trust and you can have low expertise and high trust. What do you think when you look at all of the different perspectives? Certainly, knowing that having high expertise and high trust is ideal. But what if you had low expertise, meaning you didn't build an airplane before, but your team really trusts you? What are your thoughts about that when it comes to being able to communicate as a leader? Put that into chat if you would, please. When you look at all four aspects of those credibility cornerstones, what is it you can do in order to really purposefully build your credibility and your trust? So I'm going to jump into the next concept as you put that into chat. Here's a few communication strategies that really can help you be purposeful in building trust, which leads to that credibility. Of course, do what you say what you do, right? Be consistent when it comes to the communication you put out there. When you look at questioning, how do you ask questions as a leader? Question strategically, asking open-ended questions. And I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat here. What do closed-ended questions always end with? Put that into chat. It's pretty simple. People often ask closed-ended questions accidentally without thinking about how do they craft their question. The art of asking good questions truly is an art and a practice. By asking open-ended questions, you would want to begin your questions with perhaps what or how. You might want to stay away from why-based questions. Now, why should we stay away from why questions? I know Simon Sinek says start with why. That's a different why. That why is, why do you do what you do? But if I were to ask my employee, why did you do that? How might that come across? Often why-based questions or questions that start with why come across as accusatory or mistrusting. Whereas, help me understand your thought process. How did you go about solving this problem? What options do we have to solve this problem? By asking what and how questions, you're going to have a better result when it comes to opening up the avenues for communication. When we look at another communication strategy that builds trust, you have to look at the long haul. Building great relationships don't happen overnight. We all know that. And so really being able to prioritize for the long term over short-term wins. Sometimes short-term wins, short-term gains are great, but then that could create a pattern of only working towards the short term and not really seeing that full vision of a long-term strategy when it comes to building relationships. One of the other considerations you might want to do is really minimize your distractions. This goes without saying. I think we all know this. Put away your phone. Don't look at your watch just excessively. That's the challenge with smartwatches nowadays. They give us more than time. They give us notifications. They give us Facebook. They give us text messages that can be distracting from being truly present when you're trying to communicate as a leader. And it does nothing to build trust with that individual that you're working with. Another strategy for building trust in your communication as a leader is truly to find and look for mutual success. You really want to demonstrate that you want to help them succeed, and by them succeeding, the whole organization succeeds. And it's important for you to really demonstrate that you're trying to help someone be successful, even when you're providing feedback to them. In the spirit of helping them be successful is really going to be understood and hopefully heartfelt. I had to give some feedback to a colleague recently, and the feedback was that they say a lot, that whole say and do concept, the first one we covered. They make a lot of promises, but they don't follow up. They don't follow through. And I gave this individual feedback. I said, I have to tell you that you make so many promises that don't get followed up on, that now when a promise is made or an idea or shared, or, hey, I'm going to give you this lead, and they don't follow up, I don't believe it anymore. It all now goes into this category of kind of the boy who cried wolf, I guess, the professional version of it. The individual took the feedback honestly and said, thank you, I appreciate it, because I think that individual's heard that feedback before. And I shared that feedback in the spirit of trying to help this individual be successful. And which comes to, leads into, how do we truly accept responsibility? How do we be proactive? If we know we made a mistake or we dropped the ball, put it out there and acknowledge that, take responsibility, be proactive about it, as opposed to waiting to be called on it and then be reactive. It'll put you in a place of credibility and trust, because people know that you will own up to your mistakes. One last thought on specifically building strategies, communication strategies that build trust, is to communicate the negatives. And that, I think, is more and more true today as we're living in this global pandemic, is don't sugarcoat reality. If there's a problem, say it, put it out there. And whether it be the strengths and the weaknesses of a challenge that you're dealing with, but don't hesitate to have that conversation, the real conversation about some of the challenges we're currently facing and how that is impacting you and your organization. And before we move on, I want to ask you to put that in the chat. Of all of these 7 different strategies to communicate and build trust, which one resonates with you most? I'll give you a minute to look at that, reflect. Which one resonates with you and why? Put that under chat if you would, please. And as those comments come through, as far as the strategies from building trust in our communication, I want to share with you some ideas of how you can then also demonstrate your expertise. Because remember, the credibility cornerstone is about expertise and trust. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, people being on their phone in meetings and team meetings, perhaps proactive conversation about the importance of being present and what message does it send when you're on your phone, right? And thanks so much, Margaret, for adding that in. But really thinking about what's the culture you're trying to set within your team. The culture of presence and connectedness, or the culture of multitasking, which no one can actually do. Your brain can only do one thing at a time. When we look at ideas to demonstrate your expertise, here's a few thoughts that come to mind. Because we all have our expertise, right? We all have our competencies, we have our behaviors. We don't always leverage them effectively. And I think I know I personally have struggled with this in my own life. Is I have always believed if I show up, if I do a great job, it will speak for itself. Well, and sometimes we have to do the humble brag, if you would. So how we can add value and demonstrate our expertise is to really perhaps show your value. Doing a workshop like this is one way to demonstrate my expertise, adding value. It's a complimentary. It's a way I like to give back to the San Diego business community, and it adds value, right? So how can you add value, whether it be sharing new ideas or research that you've done about a project you're working on? Avoid hedging answers. And that means you have to give some thought before you open your mouth, right? A friend of mine will just start spouting off, and he kind of thinks as he talks, which doesn't always work as far as building his expertise, because he can seem like he's all over the map and he's just kind of brainstorming as he talks. So perhaps give some thought first before you answer a question. Consider sharing your expertise in a staff meeting or a presentation. Interview other experts. There's so many people out there on LinkedIn now that are perhaps doing a quick interview and broadcasting that video. An interview with a thought leader or someone who has some insights about the type of work that you do. How can you help promote others and demonstrate your expertise? And all of that adds value as well. And consider asking others for endorsement. Sometimes we hate to do this, but if people believe in you and they value what you have to offer, perhaps ask them if they'd be willing to write an endorsement, something perhaps as simple as on LinkedIn. Maybe it's a letter of recommendation if you're looking for a job. But if people know you and love you and believe in you, often they're going to be willing to do that. So again, put it into chat. Which one of these 4 concepts of really demonstrating your expertise works best for you, or is a good reminder of something that you need to do? Put that into chat as we move forward. Because when we put it together, I want you to think about when and how can you use your credibility in the workplace to improve communication? How can you look at building that communication, building trust through communication, and building your credibility? When you put it together, what kind of opportunities present themselves to you in your work today? And think about that. Maybe make a note in your notes, put that into chat. Because really one of the things I like to do as I present this content is get you thinking about how can you truly leverage some of the content that we're exploring today. So as we move forward, I'm going to move forward into the concepts of courage. I need a drink of water real quick second. So hopefully you're putting your ideas into chat there. All right. When we look at leadership communication, we've talked about how we can build trust through communication, how we can demonstrate our expertise. And quite frankly, sometimes that means we have to have a little bit of courage. Now, one of my favorite friends and colleagues wrote a book called Courage Goes to Work. And I love how he really breaks courage down into a few different buckets. And so this tool that I'm going to introduce to you is the 3 buckets of courage. And so I want you to think about this is how does courage impact your communication? Because sometimes it takes courage to have those difficult conversations, which we'll be talking about in our next session. Sometimes it takes courage to speak our truth. Sometimes it takes courage to ask someone for a recommendation. So I'm going to show you a quick 2-minute video, maybe 2.5-minute video. This gentleman, his name is Bill Treasurer. His book is called Courage Goes to Work. And in this short video, he introduces the concepts, those 3 buckets of courage. There you go.
I think it's a mistake to think of courage as one big nebulous mass. My clients have taught me that there are at least 3 different distinct types of courage, and I want to explain them to you right now. The first kind of courage is the courage of initiative, and it's what we call try courage. It's the courage of bold action. It's the courage for you to face the unknown, to do something you've never done before. Other people may have done it and crossed that threshold, like other people drove a car before you drove a car, and then you had to learn how to drive a car. For you, it was a pioneering event. Try courage is the courage of bold action and initiative. And when we talk about wanting people to step up to the plate, we're talking about try courage, which is very different than what you heard about this morning, which also takes courage, and that is trust courage, which is the courage of vulnerability. Let me ask you a quick question by show of hands. How many of you in this room have ever been described as, or would describe yourself?
I'm going to pause it a sec, see if it's buffering while it's kind of breaking.
self
Talking
as
about trust courage.
controlling, to be honest. Okay, a lot of you. Second question, how many of you absolutely love to be controlled by people? I didn't think so. Trust courage takes experiencing vulnerability and your willingness to release your need to control and your need to be right. And it's in trusting somebody else, knowing that their mistake could become a reflection on you. So it takes courage to do it. But you see how that's different than the courage to hold action? So you have try courage, you have trust courage, and then you have the third bucket of courage we call tell courage. It's the courage of voice or assertiveness. It's the courage of the truth teller. It's the courage it takes to speak truth to power. It's the courage it takes to give a direct report the honest feedback, which is so difficult for many of you to give, as you said when you were asked that question in the last presentation. So it's the courage of voice and assertiveness, the courage of truth telling. I think it's a mistake to think of courage as one big.
All right, so what I want you to think about is the 3 buckets of courage, and then it was a little bit there for some reason. But essentially, there's try courage, trust courage, and tell courage, as he writes about in his book. And try is essentially that stick-to-itiveness, that willingness to do what you need to do to achieve a goal. Trust courage means trusting others and allowing yourself to be trusted, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, perhaps, when it comes to that relationship. And tell courage is the truth teller. Can you speak your truth? So here's a quick poll, and I'm going to have you do this in chat, actually, is of the 3 buckets of courage, try, trust, and tell, which one is your fullest bucket? Put it into chat, if you would. Which one do you think you're all over it? I will try all day long, or I'm very trusting. Yes, I've gotten burned in the past. Or yes, you can speak your truth. Which is your fullest bucket? I see a lot of tries. And Melissa, I see try and tell. Okay, great. Try. There's one trust. Thanks, Risa. A lot of try courage, right? And so, of course, the question is going to be, what would you say is your emptiest bucket? Which is your emptiest bucket? Put that in. Trust and tell. I see a few trusts. I see a couple of tells. Interest in tell courage is now kind of emerging as the trend as far as the courage that's needed. And it comes back to that leadership. How do we manage to communicate? How do we communicate as leaders, as colleagues? Can we share our truth? How do we share our truth without cutting them off at the legs if we're trying to provide feedback, right? And so when you think about the 3 different buckets of courage, it's an interesting challenge that really we can have techniques for communication, but at the end of the day, it comes down to how courageous are we to speak our truth? How can we be vulnerable? And so as we move forward, one of the things Bill likes to say, it's a quote from Aristotle, is that courage is the first of human qualities because it's the quality that really guarantees all of the others. So can we be courageous in the work that we're doing? And as we move forward, here's some food for thought. As you look at, and I ask you to share your insights in chat, when you look at that dichotomy of you have great try courage, but perhaps not great tell courage, how can you utilize courage in the workplace? How does courage impact your communication? And then when you put it into this context. Again, I have 2 of my books are on communication skills, and another book is on presentation skills. And it's really not always about the methodology, but it's what's inside of us. And how can we truly communicate effectively, to build trust, build our credibility. And how do we do that with courage? So what are your insights overall? You don't have to answer any of these particular questions, but what are your insights when it comes to those three buckets of courage? And how does that influence you as a leader or a leader in your own family in communicating? As that comes through in chat, hopefully. I want to put this into the context of where we are today, and that we have a lot of stress going on in the world, perhaps chronic stress. And interestingly, we have the American Institute of Stress did a study. I don't know if we necessarily needed a study to tell us this, is that people who are feeling stressed out might be easily frustrated or angry. And if you're frustrated and angry, it can have a negative effect on your communication skills. Did you need a study to tell you that? No, I think we know that by daily living, right? And when a person is feeling stressed, it's also very easy for them to misunderstand another person's intentions because they're taking it from their own perspective. So according to the American Institute of Stress, stress impacts our communication, right? Because we get in our own head, and kind of looking at that picture up there, we get in our own head and it's more about us and not necessarily about the person that we're trying to communicate with. And so at the end of the day, I like to put this in the context of our mindset, right? Our mindset really does matter. So I'm going to ask you to maybe put it into chat. What have you noticed? And I would actually say with this global pandemic that we're currently living in, would you agree that we're all under stress? Yes or no? Put it in chat. Yes. Are we under stress through this global pandemic? I'll share a story. My significant other was given 1 to 3 years to live 15 years ago. And thankfully, he has beat the odds. He's outlived his prognosis by 13 years or so. And the interesting challenge, and Katie, I see that mine is like giving me that round circle of disconnection. So I might need you to advance the slides. But when the role of stress on communication, so my significant other, he's beat the odds. 13 years, he has outlived the prognosis of the doctors. Well, I've realized over the years, and I've had to kind of renegotiate my perspective on stress. Because when you're living with someone with a chronic illness, you end up living in a state of semi-chronic stress, which this global pandemic has put us into a state of chronic stress as well. And here we go. My apologies.
Maureen, it looks like I lost your PowerPoint slides as well.
Okay, I'm putting that back on. Did you unmute me? Sorry. Yeah, okay, cool. There we go. Do you see Mindset Matters?
Nope.
Or, sorry? Okay, I will go ahead and proceed because you can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay, but you lost my visual slides. All right. Gosh, I love any technology. Um, so let me go ahead and just talk a little bit about how mindset matters, right? When we look at the role of communication and mindset and the chronic stress we're living in today's day and age, is that how we approach our challenges is important, right? What we do in the context of being able to communicate effectively is how we approach our mindset, right? And so one of the interesting concepts I'd like to introduce you to is that concept of spectrum thinking or full spectrum thinking. One of the great thought leaders in our world today, his name is Bob Johansen, and he talks about full spectrum thinking and the role of full spectrum thinking in the context that we can no longer think in a binary form, right? If we look at life in binary form, it's very linear, right? And I don't think we're living in a linear world anymore. In fact, Bob Johansen, he's this futurist who talks about the need for full spectrum thinking and looking at things across the spectrum and not necessarily across tasks or projects or focus. And when we look at full spectrum thinking, the idea that comes to mind is really about, for me, a mandala. A mandala is a focal point for meditation, for focus, for individuals who are needing to perhaps meditate and get the full perspective of the world, right, if you would. And so when you think of full spectrum thinking, it's looking at binary thinking as ones and zeros, like a computer language, and full spectrum thinking is more like the rainbow, right? When you put it all together in the rainbow, you can't always differentiate one color from another, and that ends up becoming our focus. And full spectrum thinking is really about how can we look at the new reality that we're living in. The new reality that we're living in today is about managing and reducing distractions and increasing our focus. How can we reduce our distractions and increase focus in this global pandemic or in this crazy world, right? And it comes to some of those ideas like putting your phone down, right? How can we reduce distraction is by increasing our focus, taking time to plan, to think, to strategize, to look at everything that's coming at us so that we can focus. One of the things that I like to share is that the mandala concept is a mandala is a beautiful, often artistic, circular artwork that is used as a focal point for meditation. It can be external, as a schematic we look at, that's a representation of our universe, or it could be an internal guide to focus our meditation and to think. So I'd be curious if you put it into chat. How many of you are meditating more or taking time to think and to process more? And what I've heard from a lot of colleagues is that people aren't meditating more. They are taking time to focus. They are really being more thoughtful and more mindful throughout this time of COVID. And one of the concepts as we look at putting this together is this concept of the mandala. And for me personally, I developed my own personal mandala, which after much thought and focus, I decided to really look at what are the main aspects of my life. And they weren't projects. It wasn't about business. It was about connection, right? It was about relationship. And so I developed this artistic view of what are the 5 main things I need to focus on in my life. And so it was really to reduce distraction and increase focus. In the center, I put creation or create. That if I need to create concepts, if I need to create content, write a book, develop a presentation, creation takes a particular area of focus in my mind. I can't be out at happy hour and writing my book, right? And that might seem pretty simple, but if I'm going to write or create a new program, I really need to sit down and focus on that aspect of creation. And if I need some time to connect with others, to build relationship, whether it be with my children, my family, or my colleagues, I need to be in that mindset of connection. And sometimes in business, you just have to be in that mindset of delivery, right? Delivering content, delivering your product or your service. And that can be all consuming when it comes to that concept of delivering. So for me, as I started to create my focus areas with this concept of full spectrum thinking across this rainbow of ideas, I came up with creation and connection and delivering. But then I also thought about what I need to do is be open to learning, to be open to exploring. And as I gave thought to this mandala for my focus, and this does connect back to our leadership communication, is if I can be purposeful in what I focus on, I can do better and perform better at what I focus on. I can perform better as the author and creator. I can perform better as a partner, a spouse, a mother, a business associate in my connection. And so when we look at all of the different ways we can focus our time and our communication, it helps for us to look at our mindset and how do we really connect with others. And so one of the considerations as we start to wind up these ideas is to think about how do we put all of this together? And I like to say you need to develop your operating rhythm. And your operating rhythm is, for me now in COVID, as the world has changed and my business has changed and relationships have changed, going more virtual and struggling with technology like we are right now, because I know you've lost my visual, but I think you have my auditory, right? Is that we need to establish an operating rhythm. We need to be able to be agile and flexible as we do our work. And in order to be agile and flexible, we also need to be able to essentially come up with our operating rhythm. Our operating rhythm is perhaps taking time to plan and reflect at the beginning of your own day. Create your own mandala, your own focal point for what is your focus going to be. This also might mean taking time to review or create your mission. I'd be curious, how many of you have really rethought about what's important to you in life as we've looked at the COVID numbers and so forth, and having to change our behavior and change how we connect with others? Is perhaps review your mission, your vision, maybe even revise or revisit your goals. I know that the man of my life I shared with you has outlived his prognosis. One of our COVID things we did was to purchase a boat. It was a lifelong dream of his to have a boat. And it's so interesting to see this man who's on oxygen and has emphysema come to life when he's on his boat, because he's just loving it. And it's not brand new. It's a 40-year-old boat. So there's a lot of projects, but at the same time, it's now more into his life and our time together. And it's a total change. I told him for the last 15 years, no, I didn't want a boat. And now we're loving it. Because we did have to review what was important to us in our life, right? So when I look at establishing your operating rhythm, it's really about creating patterns of behavior, from meditation to planning to how we communicate, how we build trust, how we build our credibility, and how do we really embrace the courage that is within us to try to achieve our goals, or to try to rebuild a relationship, to trust others, even if that might mean we get let down, and to allow ourselves to be trusted. And how do we speak our truth, right? When we put it all together and know that we need to achieve our priorities and achieve our goals, it really does come down to how can we build our credibility and our courage as a leader. And so, Katie, what I'd like you to do, because I'm kind of operating blind here as well, since I can't see the chat, if you want to mute, if people have comments or questions, I'd be happy to take any comments or questions.
I don't see any new questions, but if anyone has questions, please type them in now.
I'm trying to log back into Zoom. I'm not sure if you... And I do want to share at the end, and if you would like to, please put it into chat. I have a handout that has all of the content in kind of a summary form. If you're interested in getting a handout that has all of the concepts that I've spoken to and presented, if you would, I'd be happy to share that handout with you. There's my visual now. In looking at that full spectrum thinking, you know, whether it be the binary or one thing I would like to show you. I'm going to, because I spoke to it, but it was hard to speak to it without the visual. And let me find the visual I want to share with you. And the visual is really about that mandala, the mindset mandala. Because sometimes people have a hard time understanding the concept of a mandala. So here's a picture of a mandala. It's representative of that external schematic. Some people, artists, create mandalas that represent their world, and then others use a mandala as a focal point. So here's my mandala. As I shared with you earlier, I said it's about being in that mindset of creation, connection, delivering, learning, and being open to exploration. And when you think about the full spectrum thinking, it means we have to take time to be both strategic and kind of having that full spectrum, as well as that binary and kind of that calendar project focused as well. You need to put both together in order to take time to think and plan, to look very big picture, so that we can be on top of what's in our world and what's important to us. And then how do we plan to make it happen? So we need both that full spectrum thinking as well as the binary thinking, which is going to be more scheduled, right? And so one of the considerations then, as I shared with you, is really being able to establish your operating rhythm. knowing what's important to you, taking time to focus, and then thinking about how can I communicate most effectively in order to build those relationships. And sometimes that means choosing the best system for you, right? So I want to ask you to share, what are your key insights? We've covered the concepts of the credibility cornerstones, 3 buckets of courage, and full spectrum thinking in the context of coming up with your own focus areas for focus and building communication relationship. What has resonated with you most? Excuse me. Thanks, Shelby. Yeah, I love that 3 buckets of courage. And in fact, if those of you, if you're interested in getting the handout, I'm happy to send you a copy of the handout. Just put your email in the chat, or Katie, perhaps if you can give me the emails of those who attended, I'd be happy to share the handout as well as the links to the video. There's another video that when the visual got lost, I wasn't able to share that with you, but it was on full spectrum thinking as well. But the 3 buckets are great. It really does help you focus, and it doesn't put courage into that big amorphous, hey, I'm courageous. Well, no, there are different types of courage, and so I think those buckets really resonate. And so my question for you is this: what will you do differently now? If you think about the courage, the building your credibility, thinking differently in order to be able to increase your focus and reduce your distraction. Thanks, Teresa. Establishing that operating rhythm. And that can be challenging because that means changing our behavior. And I think COVID has forced us to change our behavior. And one of the interesting challenges when it comes to communication, if we're forced to change our behavior, we will change purely for survival. Right? Thanks, Margaret. Great point. If we're forced to change, we will change in order to survive. If we are not forced to change, like coming up with an operating rhythm, which means what are we going to do every day? How do you start your day? Do you pick up your phone and check your email, or do you start the day with thoughtful focus, right? If you want to question strategically, yeah, that takes practice, Margaret, right? So if we're going to change our behavior, we need to do it on purpose. That is actually harder than changing in response to a stimulus, which is what COVID was for us. Thanks, Melissa. Being more aware of your stress level. It does impact your communication. Here's a funny story, Melissa, about stress. I used to travel 80% of the time. I was gone 3 out of 4 weeks of the month for the last probably decade. Sometimes my spouse, my partner, hated taking me to the airport because I'm the kind of person that would get to the airport 45 minutes before the flight with my hair on fire and I'd be the last one to board the plane. And he'd text me, he said, so did your hair get stuck in the door today or not? But it was my approach to travel completely stressed him out. He hated driving me to the airport sometimes because my style of stress impacted him, right? And sometimes people don't give us that feedback. We can't change our behavior, right? And so, Melissa, that was something I had to learn, to be more purposeful. Get there an hour before the flight, not 45 minutes or 30 minutes, just because I got too comfortable with that, right? And Shelby, thanks. Yeah, stepping back to take that big picture, focus on what's really important is crucial and takes time, takes purpose. That mandala that I showed you, let me go back here for a quick second. This that you see here, I recommend that you come up with your own mandala. This learn, connect, create. It can be whatever words you want. I went onto Fiverr and had someone put it into a PowerPoint format for me. This seems pretty simple, but this probably took 2 or 3 days of deep thought and reflection for me to really focus on what was important. Part of it was triggered by my failure as a parent and feedback I got from one of my kids, like, "Hey, Mom, you're never there for me." That was hard. And so it really made me give some thought to what do I need to do differently. So when it comes to taking that time to focus on the big picture, as you say, Shelby, allow yourself time to think and really think deeply, because that's how you're going to get results. And so I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your thoughts. Over the next couple months, we're going to have another session on handling those difficult conversations and what are some strategies for you for handling difficult conversations, and then some concepts of how do you communicate more effectively in writing. If you would like the session materials from today, I'd be happy to email you a copy of those. If it's okay, let Katie know that you can give me your email or put it into chat. You can chat with me directly if you'd like. And I appreciate your time and focus today. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maureen. As Maureen mentioned, our next session will be on November 4th at 10 a.m. So I will put the link for that in the chat box here so you can go ahead and get registered. Maureen, thank you so much. We appreciate all the value information that you always provide to our group. And just to be mindful of everyone's time, we will end just a couple minutes early today. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day.